Welcome to week 2. So this week we will be exploring 2 roles. We will first in this presentation explore the role of the audience, and then later in the week we'll explore the role of the dancer. So some questions to consider throughout this presentation is as you interact with your audience materials this week, right? What is an audience? Who makes up an audience? What is the purpose of an audience? What does an audience do, or what should they do? And then on the flip side, what shouldn't an audience do? So the root of the word audience is audi, which means sound, right? The act of hearing, the act of listening. However, in this class, when we hear the word audience, we're thinking more seeing, bearing witness to, experiencing. And the role of the audience may feel like a very passive role. However, I cannot emphasize enough just how active the role of a good dance audience member is, right? You're not just sitting there and having, sensory information thrust upon you, right? Sound and visual information, right? But you chose to be there at the dance performance. You're actively listening and seeing and feeling and having experience, feeling emotions, smelling the popcorn, right? Interpreting all of this sensory stimuli provided through the dance performance and actively trying to make sense of it. And in this class, I want you to know that as audience members, right, we'll watch a lot of dance, right? You'll have a lot of information given to you through these dances, and my point of view is that the audience interpretation of the dance is valid. I find in this class a lot of times students, when they're interpreting dances in their papers and in their concert critiques, I didn't get it, or I'm afraid to tell you what I think because I don't think I'm right, or I don't think that I saw it the way that the choreographer saw it. Like, as an audience member, if you can back up your interpretation with evidence from the dance, the costumes and the lighting and the music together made me think, like, if you can back up, that is, exactly what I'm looking for in this class. I'm not looking for you to read the choreographer's mind, especially as we're getting to, modern and postmodern dance, where the dances may not necessarily have a narrative, but they may be more abstract in meaning. So as long as you can back up your interpretation as an audience member, like, you will do great in this class. Okay, stepping off my soapbox now. All right, so hopefully all of us have been to some sort of event where we have, taken on the role of an audience member, right? But you may not have taken the time to think about what's expected of you as an audience member. So really, audience member expectations can be broken down into 3 main categories, right? Number 1, be prepared, right? Don't just go to a show having no idea what you're getting yourself into, right? Take some time to research the choreographer, understand what genre they're working within, know what kind of venue you're stepping into, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this presentation. But depending on the venue, what's expected of you could be completely different. So definitely take some time as an audience member to prepare yourself in that regard. And then in a lot of dance concerts, dance shows, they give you a program where they give you clues, right? They give you a title that kind of captures the main idea of the dance. And some are even super nice and give you program notes where the choreographer has taken the time in a couple of sentences to tell you, what they were trying to capture in the dance, what the dance is about for them. Right? Once again, not to say that you have to see it that way, but these are clues that can kind of help you have a better experience as an audience member, right? So use this information, be prepared. Right? Number 2, right? Be thoughtful, like avoid distracting others and avoid distracting yourself, and of course avoid distracting the performers on stage. So things like being on time or being early to the performance so that the dance can start on time and you're not letting all the light in as you're entering the stage space late. Avoid making noise, right? So keeping talking to a a minimum in certain venues is really important because it's very quiet. Silencing your cell phone, right? Not bringing really loud candy wrappers in that are going to distract and make a lot of noise. Some venues require you to stay in your seat for the entirety of the performance so that you don't get up and block other audience members' sight lines, right? Or if it's, a dance concert where there's multiple short works, you should wait until between the pieces to get up and, move around if you need to leave. And then just be mindful of sight lines not blocking anybody's view, right? You don't want to wear large hats or, be sitting on your knees or something where you could block people behind you, right? So be thoughtful. Just be a good person. Yeah. Okay. And then last, of course, is to show appreciation, right? It takes so much work to put on a production. So just be a kind audience member, respond right when it's appropriate, laugh, sigh, whatever is appropriate for the performance. And of course, when it's over, clap, applaud, stand up, any way to show your appreciation for all of the work that, the incredible team has done to entertain you for that night. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the most common dance performance venues, why they're structured the way they are, what sort of performances do well there, and then you'll pause and you'll get to watch a performance in that type of venue, and then you'll come back to this video so that we can talk a little bit about the audience expectations in that specific location. So our first performance venue is, of course, the proscenium stage, right? So the proscenium stage it's your traditional stage space, right, where the audience it could be sloped, rising away, right, so that everyone in the audience has a nice clear sight line to the stage. The stage is typically raised and it's framed with an architectural frame, which is referred to as the proscenium arch, right? And so all of the action happens within this frame, right? So the dance happens within this rectangular space, right? And the stages are typically very deep. They sometimes could be raked, meaning that the stage could also be a slope, which is where we get the stage terms upstage and downstage, right? Upstage going up towards the back of the stage and downstage coming down, right, towards the audience. Sometimes the front of the stage can extend past that proscenium arch into the auditorium, and this is known as the apron. And when the apron you can take it off, that's where the orchestra, if the performance has like a live orchestra, that space right there at the front of the stage that's underneath is referred to as the pit, and that's where the live orchestra will be there to play, and that way both the performers and the audience can hear the music, but without blocking the audience's sight lines of the performers. So since all of the action happens within this frame, there's there's the three walls of the performance space, the back wall and then the two side walls, but there's no front wall. So that, space where, if it's a picture frame, there'd be a clear glass the audience looks through to see the performance is referred to as the fourth wall, right? It's not an actual wall. But in, dance performances that are held within proscenium stages, dancers typically do not break the fourth wall, meaning the dancers are in their world and they are performing and the audience is witnessing it, but the dancers don't communicate directly to the audience members, right? The audiences are just witnessing the dancers within their performance environment. So for an example of this, go ahead and pause this video and go to our viewing page for this week's module, and you're going to watch an excerpt of a performance that is performed in this specific stage space, and then come on back and we'll talk a little bit about what an audience is expected to do when viewing a performance in this space. Right, so I imagine this is the performance space that we're most familiar with. So we're also most familiar with the audience etiquette rules for these types of spaces, right? So the audience is further away from the performers, right? We're separated by that fourth wall. So typically the audience is far less distracting to performers. A lot of theaters allow you to eat. If you whisper, the performers aren't necessarily going to hear you. If you're sitting, in the back and you get a text, yes, the audience members around you are going to be annoyed, but it probably won't distract the performers. But you are in complete darkness, right? Because the audience needs to be brought past that fourth wall into the world that the performers are creating on stage. So the stage is very brightly lit, and then the audience is in complete darkness. So any light that you create in the audience is going to be a huge distraction. So if you are texting, right, typically videoing and taking flash photography is highly discouraged in these sorts of audience situations because it's incredibly distracting to other audience members. And if a performer is looking out into a dark room and all of a sudden there's a flash of light, it's going to blind them, and it could be, it could cause a real safety concern for them on stage. All right, very typical stuff. All right, so moving into probably some more unfamiliar performance spaces. So we have thrust stages, theater in the round, and black box performance spaces. Right, so in that upper left-hand corner, we have thrust stages. And this is where the stage platform thrusts out into the audience's space so that not only can the audience members see the performance from the front, but the audience can also sit on the side. So there's audience members on 3 sides of the performance space. And this really decreases the distance between performers and audience members, which is really a theme for all 3 of these spaces. Right, and then in the upper right hand corner we have theater in the round, which is just what its name suggests, right? There is no on stage, off stage, back, front, right? All 4 sides of the stage space can be seen by the audience. So the performances that happen in these types of spaces are staged very differently from those that are staged in proscenium stage spaces, because you don't ever want to have your back to audience members who've paid for tickets for an entire hour and a half. So you really have to engage with the audience members, all around. It's a 360 performance experience for sure. And then the last one at the bottom is our black box theater space. And a lot of colleges and universities have this. And it's very much a transitional space. It gets its name because it is a black box, right? It has a black ceiling, a black floor, the walls are painted black. So really it can be used for any sort of performance. You can build it up and make it whatever kind of space that you need. And you can bring in chairs, you can make the audience sit just in the front, you can have them on 3 sides, you could have them all around. So it's, great for smaller productions and constantly bringing in a variety of productions. Right, but what all 3 of these spaces have in common is that fourth wall that we were talking about with proscenium stages, right? We don't have that proscenium arch, that frame, that distance between the performers and the audience members that we saw in the proscenium stage space. The performers are much, much closer to the audience members, and so a lot of times in these performances that fourth wall gets broken down and performers will talk directly to audience members, right? They may pull audience members onto the stage for audience participation. So these lines between the world of the performance and the real world of the audience members really starts to get blurred in the performances that happen here. Right, so a very different type of choreography can be done in these spaces, right? Because you heard her foot smack against the other lady's face, right? So subtle sounds, subtle movements can be much more magical and will actually read to the audience in these spaces when you're much closer. But with that, there are, heightened audience expectations. Being so close, the fourth wall might be down, so you could be asked to participate. in these venues, but also, it's much easier to be a distraction, right? If you make any sort of sounds, if you're whispering, not only will you distract your fellow audience members, but you probably will even distract the performers on stage. And with the fourth wall down, they may even call you out on it. So you have to be incredibly mindful of any distractions that you're going to cause within these environments. And then, as an audience member, you get to choose, do you want to sit in the traditional front, or do you want to try sitting on the side and see what your experience is going to be like over that. So you kind of have a little bit of control over your experience and what you're going to see and how much you're going to see in these stage environments. And speaking of how much control you have over your experience of the performance, that transitions us perfectly into immersive environments, right? And so these are environments where there is no fourth wall at all, right? The wall that keeps the performer's world from the audience world does not exist, right? Sometimes there's not even walls in the performance space. And a perfect example of this is Punch Drunk's Sleep No More, which is a retelling of the classic Macbeth in a hotel in New York. And I'm actually going to let you go ahead and go to the video now, and you'll see some interviews with the performers, and they'll talk about what a unique experience this is for performers and audience members alike. Kind of cool, right? I mean, it's like those goosebumps choose your own adventure books, right? You're not told what to look at, right? If you find a performer's story to be more interesting, you can follow them around. But, with this choosing your own adventure, you're going to miss things. So the audience's experience is, kind of a big part with immersive theater. So some audience etiquette expectations, right? You may be asked to move around. You may not just come in and sit down and watch in silence. Audience participation is definitely going to be a big one here. You kind of have to be okay with not seeing everything. With that performance specifically, they do the whole show on a loop. So they perform the show from beginning to end 3 times to give the audience members a chance to see multiple sections. And then they all come together for a finale at the end, so the audience can all exit together. But still, you can go and see the show multiple times and still not experience every single thing. But what's unique is with that fourth wall down, you can talk to the performers, you can touch the performers, you can interact with the performers, you can explore the set, and it really keeps audience members very much engaged in the performance. Versus, if you go to a performance in a proscenium stage space, if you fell asleep, right, you're not going to distract anybody. But your engagement and your involvement is very, very much expected in these immersive theater environments. All right, so last but not least, we have site-specific dances. And site-specific dances are dances that are made in unconventional spaces, right? Not traditional flat theater spaces with lighting and sound systems, right? But these are, pre-made sites, and performers, choreographers come in and really collaborate with the location to create a dance that can only be done in that specific location, right? They can't just pick up the choreography and put it on a stage or put it in a different site, right? It is choreography made specifically to highlight the features and the history and the use of that site to really bring awareness to these spaces. Right, and the choreographer has freedom, right? The fourth wall could be up or down. They could give seating, right? Or it could be, where the audience has to follow them along in some of these bigger spaces. So go ahead and pause your video now and check out the 3 examples that I put up and see what you think. And then come on back. So probably by now, as you're watching, you're already kind of predicting what I'm going to say when you come back and we get to talk about the audience etiquette. But right, in these spaces, it really depends on how the choreographer is using the space. The audience may be expected to follow the performers from location to location. They may be sitting out in the sun in a while and need to have an umbrella or sunscreen. These are great locations. Sometimes you can bring pets, or it's great for kids where they may need to get up and move around and have frequent breaks, where in a proscenium theater it's really tough to get up and have to keep leading the performance. And some of these site specific performances that are out in parks, these are great environments to bring kids and to have dogs and to be able to come and go as you please. Yeah, so I think that's about all I have for audience etiquette and how it can change as you go about different performance venues. Go ahead and head back on over to our Canvas shell to modules and check in with how much you got from today's lecture with our check-in assignment.